on the move. Little dance step was good. Couple of bounces. Can take it himself and launch long. Inspirational.
Time ticking away. Stop it. For Silvani. What about that?
McKay. 2 in a minute. And they are dancing now, the Blues.
Almost McKay. Walsh, here he is. Straightens up and has delivered. Is there nothing this young man can't do?
Hello and welcome to the Navy Blue Corner. I'm Ian, joined as always by my good mate Lockie, and the trade period for 2022 is done and dusted. We are here to recap what happened and discuss where that leaves us as we head into the draft. Lockie, how are you going, and how did you find the trade period as a whole?
Going very well, thank you, mate. It's good to be back here again. Not as exciting as previous years. I think that's fair to say. And
That's
kind of
for sure.
before the period, we said maybe it's a good thing that it's going to be a bit quieter. So, I'm a bit on the fence about it, but overall a good trade period, I think. How are you feeling about things?
Very good. It was an interesting one. I feel like the last few years, things have kind of gone to the end, like right down to the wire, and you've been watching that live stream being like, oh, are we getting into the door? What's happening? I think of that time with Sauce a couple of years ago with the Jack Martin and the Tom Papley deal, where you just so much stress going into this last bit where, we got our stuff done in like the second day, and then that was really it. We only had one player outgoing. We'll obviously get in and talk about that, but it wasn't a heartbreaker of losing, a Patrick Cripps or one of our top line players. We sort of kept everyone we wanted, got a player in the door nice and early. It was nice to just sit back and watch all these other teams scramble to get stuff across the line for once.
I know, you're very right. We obviously got our one deal done quite early, which was good to have that out of the way. And then there was little whispers that maybe there could be something else cooking, but our man Nick was pretty quick to shut those things down. It looked like it all went to plan.
It does. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about the Carlton business, what Nick Austin got up to. We brought in Blake Acres for a future third-round pick. Lockie, let's break down this deal. What did you make of this one?
I mean, I think the odds of that future third-round pick being someone that slots straight into our best 22 is worth the trade, is the way that I kind of look at these things. We thought, I think that Acres is going to be starting in round one in that wing spot. And so I think that's great business to be trading away a third rounder for that.
I couldn't believe it when the third rounder was brought into the discussions in the media, and then no one was saying, oh, it should be a second, should be whatever. It was almost unanimous, even Freo supporters saying, yeah, future third sounds about right, which normally doesn't. It's not the case with us for whatever reason. I feel like sometimes we're always overpaying. So it was nice to give out a pick that we don't really care about. And as you say, I think that we always have this discussion, but everyone kind of overrates picks quite often. You're like, oh, well, third round and fourth round. How often do these picks end up turning into superstar players? The hit rate, I'd love to go through and find out the percentage of these players really past the second round. Good luck getting anyone that's going to be a 100+ gamer that's going to do a lot for your club. And even in this case of a Blake Acres, I think no one's really expecting him to be one of the best players. If we end up, going past him in a couple of years, it's not a bad bit of business because you haven't given up anything big for him. Salary cap, you're not giving a lot away. He's better than what we have now. An upgrade on, say, a Jack Nunes that was already occupying that role. If he plays well, beautiful. If he doesn't, it's not a risk. But I think he, like you said, he's going to slot into our best 22, be that winger that we kind of crave at the moment. And you just can't say no to that deal.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's funny seeing how some people seem to believe that a trade is only good if it's someone who's going to be a top 5 player in your team. And it's like a big deal, that kind of thing. But if we're able to upgrade in areas of the field where we can for good value, then that's a big win. Specifically like where we're at with our list at the moment, or where we believe we're at. 6 or 7 years ago, it was like just bring in as many picks as we can, and we'll see who works out. But now that we're a lot more seasoned. We just don't need to be bringing in players, as many players like that.
Yeah, exactly. We went after a need. We brought in probably one of the best available. You'd probably say Carl Amon was the top, but for what you're having to pay for his salary and everything, it's probably not going to be worth it. We probably don't have the cap to give to him, especially when we're re-signing players like Harry on big money deals for a long time. Blake Haggis makes sense. And then really the only other deal that we had so far anyway, there's some rumors of some, picks getting traded away, but it was Will Setterfield made his way to Essendon along with pick 68 in this year's draft, and we got back a future 4th rounder. Lockie, what did you make of this one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a minor shock, I suppose, when I saw that it went down. I think on the last episode, you and I kind of spoke, and we were like, Dow or Setterfield? If you had to keep one, which would we prefer? Yeah. And it did feel like Setterfield. And then again, it's one of those things that when it happens, I say to myself, I wanted to keep Dow anyway.
Yeah, Dow's going to be one of the greatest players you've ever seen, I think. He's what every Carlton supporter was thinking after this. It's Dow season, of course. Yeah, I thought weirdly that we would get a little bit more for him, but I do understand he's out of contract, and it almost seemed as if Nick Austin was trying to do a bit right by the player. We maybe saw that a bit with the Liam Stocker deal, where his best chance of getting onto another list, he's probably not a required player. Liam Stocker was to delist him. No one really wanted to trade for him. And that he would have had discussions to see if we could get something for Stocker. And I think in this instance, we weren't going to get a lot for him. If this 4th round pick was in this year's draft, it's like a bit of an upgrade. So it's much of a muchness, really. It's almost a delisting. The question was always Dow or Setterfield. It's hard when Dow's contracted, probably why I didn't get as much interest, because again, if it's Dow on the trade table, is someone's willing to actually have to pay for him, whereas with Essendon, it really was just a swap of 4th rounders.
Yeah, for sure. And at this stage, with Setterfield not being a walk-up best 22 guy, I don't think we could have really expected that much more, especially seeing the market value of Akers and other players dealt in the period. It just seems like, the pick versus player value, I don't feel is quite right, but I guess that if that's what the market demands, then that's the way it is. Yeah,
and Setterfield's such an interesting player. We always thought we were close to unlocking him at times. I feel he was weirdly that guy that he'd spend his couple of weeks in the 2s, he'd come back into the 1s, whether it was wing or late in the season, it was on ball. And I feel like his first game back was always so good, and you start to get excited thinking, oh my God, we've done it. We've found out Setterfield. He's going to be a gun for us. He's going to be a bit of a role player. And then by about 2-3 weeks later, can we just get him back to the 2s? He's just not right. And then he comes back into the team later in the season, and you start to get excited again and think this is his role. It just never sort of happened for him. And in the end, I think that's just what Setterfield will be. And maybe I'll be wrong and he'll be a gun player, but looking for him getting to our midfield, there's far too many players ahead of him. Even maybe a Doherty has taken over his spot a little bit. I'd prefer his versatility slightly over Dow. Much of a muchness. It's not a big difference between the two. It's going to be interesting to see how the midfield, I guess, plays out as we head into next season.
Yeah, and I think we will be a little bit bitter if he does take that next step at another club. But I guess the precedent is there right now with like SPS, and we had these feelings. And we're like, oh no, he's gonna blossom at another club now, and that hasn't transpired. So we'll see if it's the same for Big Will.
100%. So we did this a couple of weeks ago, but let's grade for our season. But let's grade the trade period, because we know the report card style is what the media love to do. So why not do it here at the Navy Blue Corner? What would you grade our trade period, Lockie? Because in years past, when we've brought big stars in, you've tried to be like, oh, we've brought in, your Adam Sarge, your Zach Williams. It's an A+. We haven't done a lot here, so I'm very interested to see where you've gone.
Well, I'm equally interested to hear yours. I like when we have parts of the show where we don't know what each other are going to say. I've landed on B+.
Oh,
I think. No, don't tell me.
I've also gone B plus, mate. Of course we're in sync.
I think it's fair to say that it went to plan, or even potentially better than plan, with what we had to give up to get Akers and Setterfield potentially being delisted if you didn't get the deal done anyway. It just would have been nice to have a little bit more excitement. So that's the only reason why I can't give it up to an A.
No, I think you've nailed the explanation. Like, my note I had was, like, we got the need, we got who we wanted in, we didn't lose anyone, which it's another season, and I don't want to jinx this, so I'm touching all the wood I can in this room.
Me too.
We've never, talking about all of the trade periods, that's every season, there's always a big player that's on the move, and for this whole time, really, since the rebuild, we've been that club that, we're looking to try and get one of these players in, whether it's your Cornelios, Dylan Shields, whoever it is. We haven't been on the other end where we've had a player leave. And I was trying to think about that with, say, Dunkley, where Brisbane are excited to get him, but Doggers is sad to lose him. And we've just never really felt that so far. So hopefully we never do. And with that, it's hard to grade this as anything negative, but I agree with you. Not getting anything amazing, it's hard to really say it's an A. So I've just gone close enough. We'll give it a B plus.
Totally. And maybe this is a bit of a segue, but you've just kind of triggered me with what you said there. Highly recommend everyone listen to Harry on Dylan Friends. Have you listened to that one?
Yeah, definitely have.
It's so great to hear him talk about how much the culture has shifted since he started to where it is now. And I think that says a lot about why our best players aren't being linked in trades, because it really does seem like these players love their home at Carlton, where it doesn't seem like many would have said that 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on, we'll just digress real quickly on that chat. What did you make of some of the comments hearing about the culture and saying that he was maybe wanting to do some extra training and try to improve himself, and hearing that the senior players at that stage were kind of almost making fun of him for wanting to do those things, and it's being like an uncool thing to want to try? I guess what was your take when you heard those little things?
It was genuinely hard to listen to, because and it makes sense, I guess. And I was thinking about who are these people that are with these bad influences at the time. But I guess it checks out from the public perception of what was going on. So it kind of aligns in that way. And it makes sense, I guess, why potentially development was stunted by a few, and maybe we're a few years behind schedule where we thought.
I think it was not something I necessarily expected, even though maybe we should because of where we've been. But hearing those things, it's never good. I suppose it's good in a way now, knowing that it's changed and shifted so much, and that it's going to be such a positive thing to hear that this is what all the players, 90% of the list, are now doing. So when you are a young kid, like you said, and you're coming into this environment, you're going to be trying to do everything you can to better yourself, because that's what everyone wants to do. And it isn't just a selfish thing. It seems like the group really want to get the best out of each other as well, which is really nice to hear. But it makes sense, I guess, of why we were so bad for such a long period, and why we haven't had this success. We haven't been able to breed winners. There's talks about culture not being good, and you nailed it with development. Did this hurt players like a Paddy Dow and a Lockie O'Brien at that stage? And you can name a bunch of other draft picks that maybe never kicked on, because I'm not going to name names because I honestly could not tell you who those senior leaders were, and there's no point speculating. But when you have guys that are making, like Harry said, you want to kind of fit in at the football club, and the last thing you're going to do when you step in as a fresh 18-year-old is go against the norm. So it's no wonder we struggled, but it's probably a positive to hear just how good things were. And probably the other talking point I had off the interview was just him worrying maybe slightly before he re-signed his contract when we got Voss and those in, him thinking, well, what's it going to be like? Because I've had coaches before, I've had CEOs, there's been so much disruption. And what did you make of those comments? And I guess it's something I probably haven't thought about, thinking how it would feel to be a player with so much constant change when you maybe don't have that affinity like we do as fans. What did you make of those comments?
Yeah, I found those comments really insightful as well, because looking now at, I guess, the decisions that we made with Vossi, CEO, Prez, and everything a year ago, like it all seems like no-brainers now, and it's all sunshine and rainbows and all that, and it's great. But what a risky time that truly was.
Yeah.
Because maybe that was like the last straw for some guys. Who knows? All of the disruption and stuff that had happened in these guys' careers, and if the culture, didn't improve, and say that this season was a complete failure, like maybe we would be in a completely different position now. That does not seem unreasonable to suggest.
Yeah, and you put yourself into his shoes, take your bias away, goes to a football club that hasn't had success since the maybe late 90s, has played finals a little bit in the 2010s, but been a bit of a rabble for most of the time. You come to it with you're not a Carlton supporter, you don't have that thing, you're just trying to play footy. It's like your third coach. God knows how many CEOs, God knows how many backroom staff you've gone through, assistant coaches, guys you've been close to that you did like, that have maybe gone, guys you didn't like that have gone as well. Like, what do? Do you sit there and think, oh, we'll just hope the next one's good? Of course you're going to have those thoughts of, well, why should I stay here if there's no guarantee that this is going to be better? And maybe I've had enough of trying, and I'm doing everything I can, but if this whole organization's no good and we constantly keep recycling every 2 or 3 years, that's not going to do me any good. The stress on the players every time there's the coach is under pressure as well. You often hear about that, and that's why it seems whenever someone gets sacked, there's that release and they go on and win the next week. Yeah. I can't imagine how that'd be when you keep losing those coaches. So it was so lovely to hear that obviously that discussion was going to happen, and maybe that always makes you take a step back because you don't expect it. But then the turnaround of, well, it didn't take long for me to realize this is the place. We're on the right track. Vossi's amazing. We've sort of sorted it, and he's happy enough to commit, till 2030 or whatever it is, something ridiculous. Obviously, we're paying him money, but it's a long period of time. There's definitely some good positives that I hope will come out of all of this now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me grateful because you look at the landscape and there's a few clubs that are going through significant change that are in similar positions to where we were a year ago. And it won't necessarily work out the way that it has for us. So it's a good time to be grateful for the position we're in.
100%. It's nice to have an off season where we're talking about positivity more from what we saw rather than just hope. And I guess with that,
exactly,
we talked about it a little bit in the Will Setterfield trade, but it's probably been the thing that is spoken about the most because we've now lost him, and that is midfield depth. There was the Paddy Dow debate. Who do we want to see leave? Now, let's talk about this depth. Let's go through it. I know we spoke about a depth chart in our list analysis, but we tried to keep it to one position only. I want to go quite deep with this because in a real life scenario, if there's injuries, who's stepping up next? And I want to get your thoughts on this and see if you think that this is strong enough. So let's talk about the midfield that started at our best, and that is Cripps, Walsh, Hewitt, Kennedy, Chera. Ideally, all of those are in the team.
Agreed.
That is a given. So if there's an injury, you'd probably say the next in, I've kind of ranked 3 guys in this category that I think at the moment are your next in, and that is either Paddy Dow, it's either Ed Curnow, if fit, who might maybe a little bit forgotten about, but he's still there. And then because of the end of season, you've got a Sam Doherty that you can throw in, knowing that we've got a fair chunk of guys that can play down back. On the back of that, do you think that at your best, I guess, more defined midfielders, is that enough depth for you right there? Are you happy enough?
Am I happy enough? I'm struggling to put Doc in there because it feels like such a Band-Aid solution because of the situation that we put ourselves in round 23. But I understand why you put him there. I don't think so. I think I'm really not sure what we're going to get from Ed next season.
Yes.
I think I am happy with Dow though being the 6th because I think from what we have seen, like he does contribute when he comes in. No, it's not. He just hasn't had that extended crack that we hope for. there's no doubt there that I think we at least need one more player who is a proper midfielder to be on the list.
I think where I see it as well, because on the back of that, we've lost one. We maybe haven't replaced one yet. Obviously, we'll get to the draft in other episodes, and potentially that's where the difference is. But we're still going to be bringing in, hypothetically, an 18-year-old, 19-year-old that has not played any AFL games. So how much can you truly expect their output to be compared to a Will Setterfield? There's a chance it's higher straight away. There's a chance that they're going to need a little time to develop. I think we maybe still need one body, but maybe it's been weird that even though we've had an injury at times, we haven't even brought in a Dow. We've just changed the rotation up slightly and given other guys in the team more time. But I agree with you. I think there's maybe one spot short. But I'll go down to this next group of players, and a lot of this is incredibly break in case of emergency, or it's guys maybe pinch hitting or potential. And I want to get your thoughts on this crop of players. And I know some of them maybe are a little bit far-fetched, but firstly, I'll go Zach Fisher, because he's someone that we have seen him spend some time in the midfield that could get called upon there. We've also got a David Cunningham that his best games for us has been through that midfield. We don't know what player we're getting back. There's an opportunity for him to break in if there's an injury. Then past that, a Jack Carroll that is that little bit younger. Who knows if he can blossom and take that step forward this year. And then past that, it's then, your Lockie Fogarty that has done it a bit at VFL level. Jack Martin, who's pinched hit. We've spoken about Zach Williams at times, but never really seen it. And then really, if the whole list is injured, then you can maybe say a Jack Silvani, because he's played rucking bit around the ball. We talk about that Nat 5 tagging game that he will always mention when we're talking about Jack Silvani. And then even a Blake Acres, I know some have mentioned that he could play on ball if you need him. When you extend that depth down and talk about maybe opportunity, and at what cost have you taken Setterfield out of that to give maybe some of this group opportunity? What would you say, I guess, about relieving his duties out of that to see if these guys can have a crack?
Well, I think when you list the names like that, at least the first half, it does give you a bit of hope. And whenever you think of those players in a positive light, it's like, oh yeah, they have the attributes that maybe could do it. But I think the one for me is Cunners, because I feel like I have to be optimistic and say, well, with what we've seen with players coming back from long-term injuries for us in recent history, it's worked out quite well. Like we didn't know what we
Coleman medalist.
Exactly. It's like why should we write Cunners off and say that he's never gonna? Well, obviously Curnow is better than he was pre-injury, so why couldn't that happen to Cunningham? And like you say, like the Essendon game, it hurts picking out one game as like where a player showed it, but it's true. It's like if he could emulate anything close to that, he'd be pushing for a starting spot almost with someone like Kennedy.
It was like his only real run, I feel, through that David Teague era. It was like, oh, here you go, and then back to high half forward, and we maybe give you 2 or 3 centre bounces, but we won't give you a full run. And it seemed odd at the time, and he could be one of those missing links in this team. We know he's got that sort of goal sense. I feel like when he's in the team, the best ball movement seems to involve him somewhere in that chain.
Yep.
But who knows? Cool. Again, is he going to play any football? What kind of player are we getting? It's all hypotheticals, and we're always going to be positive around it. But you have to be somewhat pessimistic and say, well, are you replacing him with an Ed Curnow and a Cunningham that, well, at least Setterfield was durable. But I think that opportunity-wise, I've sort of sold myself into this, because I think opportunity cost is, well, does Jack Carroll get to develop if Setterfield's there? Because if there's an injury, you're probably not going to give him that opportunity. You're going to go a bit safer. Yep. Same for a Cunningham. Same for the young draftees that are coming through this year. And if we're maybe looking to try and get 2 in, and say we're looking for 2 midfielders for whatever reason, does that sort of clog the list a little bit? Not to be rude to Setterfield, but a guy that we know the ceiling's not there, because you're going to go safe.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. I think it's a similar case. Granted, they're at different parts of their career, but like Jack Nunes was still playing some good football this year.
Yeah.
But if he's on that list, then you're right. The opportunity isn't going to be there for some of the other wingers that are trying to get that spot. So I'm with your logic. I think if we have these bright youngsters, and we're not forcing Carroll to play 20 games in the midfield, that's not what this is. This is still just about depth. I think it's valid.
It's a bit of a risk, but if you name those players during that starting year, Cripps, Walsh, Hewitt, Kennedy, Chera, knowing that we have played games where we've just run, 4 of those and a Fisher through it, and we've beaten good teams with that. So I'm not too concerned. I think you're maybe just hoping that someone can develop, and you're a little bit injury free. So surely we can have a better injury run at some stage. Surely it's got to turn with our luck. But let us know, I guess, what you think with our midfield depth, because I know it's been a big talking point. If you're on YouTube, drop it in the comments. If you're listening to this on the podcast, message us on any social media, tweet at us. It's at Navy Blue Corner. We'd love to get to know your thoughts. And who do you think maybe can jump up? What do you think at Cunningham? Is he someone that can be best 22 and be this spark? I really want to know what you guys are thinking. But look, this trade period has left us with the draft hand of pick 10, 29, 49, and 66. There's been talks that we kind of mentioned earlier that Nick Austin himself said, I'd love to, trade up a little bit. I guess I'd love to know your thoughts on the potential of this, because do you think, would you like for us to move upwards from 10? There's also been speculation of maybe trying to get a pick between the ones that we currently have, being 10 and 29. What do you make of the chatter?
Yeah, good chatter. I like the chatter.
Yes, definitely.
I obviously maybe it's not obvious, but I do like the idea of us trying to bundle some things to move up from 10. I think, particularly if we're moving up picks, it's likely because, you're more of a draft expert than I am, but they'll have their eye on someone in particular.
Yes.
And if we've got our eye on someone in particular, I think that's a good thing. So if he's able to be crafty and make something happen, then I'm here for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And obviously I've somewhat followed this draft class, definitely the most I ever had. So I'm slightly biased in that. I think from my perspective, because I'm definitely no expert, I'm very interested to see, now that I've really followed a class from the draft, from the starting of the year, to see how the players that I rated go for the next 5 years and what actually translates from under 18 football of a guy that you think could be a superstar, and then how that progresses as you actually enter the AFL. Because around those sort of picks, even at pick 10, we're going to get a good player there. There's about, I'd say, 3 guys that at the moment I'm looking at. A few I'd like maybe more, but I think regardless of how it falls, there should be some decent sort of midfield talent around that pick. And then when you start to push back from that, it introduces some interesting thoughts. I'm very keen to see what style of player we're aiming at for this trading up pick, whether it's another one of these midfielders that might slide a little bit there. Because in this draft range, you've got a lot of sort of mediums kind of forwards in there that are add a bit of spark to your forward line, not necessarily kind of like your small forwards. Then you've also got these sort of high half forward burst players. So it will be interesting to see what we're kind of going for throughout it. But I'm pretty happy to do it. Would you be worried, I guess, if for whatever we get into this, if we gave up a future first rounder and then we were without that first round pick for next year to bring in 2 first rounders this year per se?
No, I don't think so. I have to. I don't know how many times I've mentioned this on the show. The club's given me so many reasons not to have faith in things like this in the past, but with this current group, there's no reason for me, I guess, not to trust it. Again, you'll have a better gauge of, I guess, strength or quality of the classes, but I don't see any reason why that would be a bad thing. If they've got their eye on guys in particular, that are going to fit the need, and hoping, I mean, hopefully you agree with me that whoever we're taking this year isn't going to be a significant player for us next year, and they can develop normally.
Yeah, and I think I'm very much taking this win now. Like, we've locked in our best players and for a long period of time, and they're starting to hit their peak. So I think the big win now is really that next sort of 3 years where we need to really take that step. And I think we've had this discussion the last couple of years. Like, what's the point in worrying about who we're going to bring in 2-3 years time when we need to do something right now? So if we can
100%.
address some list needs, bring in talent that, like you've mentioned, we believe is going to help us right now, I don't think that there's an issue if we don't have one next year. You can probably keep doing we'll trade a future first and get back in the draft next year. You never know if there's other players that we start to move on because for whatever reason they've moved down the pecking order. Say we bring in a player and all of a sudden, not that I would like it to happen, but who knows, maybe they take over Fisher's role and then he's maybe not required and you can get something for him just to throw out a random player for it. You never know what could happen in a season. So I don't think it's a bad thing for us to trade up. I'm very excited to see what we do with that because I've tried to have a look at a couple of teams that have picks around that area. It's not a lot that have a couple. Our first one that makes the most sense is probably GWS because they have so many picks. They've got obviously pick one, then it's 15, 18, 19, and 31. And if I was GWS, I feel like the best way is to maybe even out a little bit and get rid of 18 or 19 for a future first next year. Because you'd probably think that we're anywhere, honestly, you'd think we're going to finish in the top 8, but we're not necessarily, banked for that top 4. So they have a good potential to get a better pick than 18 or 19 with ours next year. So it would make sense for them to try to leverage that a little bit rather than taking, really 4 in that sort of first round, even though maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they want to just bring in the talent now. But if there was a team to move out and want that future first, I think GWS makes a lot of sense. The other is maybe Sydney for having, 14 and 17. But I don't know, because of their list, maybe their profile, they're thinking we only need one player. But it sounds like Sydney are more keen to bundle those to move further up. Would you maybe take a 14 and 17 for 10?
Yeah,
and move backwards?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the only way to be able to answer that well, though, is to know who we'd be ending up with.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's why I wanted to ask you, because you made that Fisher example earlier. Obviously, he was just a random name, and this kind of will lead into our other delisted players question a bit later. But as I look at our best 22, assuming that we go into the season fully healthy,
yes,
I just struggle to see how like the quality of this first year player to come in is going to have to be really good to be pushing somebody out. Do you actually see that as something that would be feasible next year, regardless of injuries? If injuries happen, then players get opportunity.
Yeah.
But could you see a first-year player being above the hierarchy in one of these positions?
I definitely could. It's strange to say that for like a midfielder coming in because our midfield's seemingly so stacked. And I guess I'll just throw out a couple of names. Not going to go super in depth because we've got our draft episode where I'll do that. But the guys kind of getting linked around our pick at the moment. It's Bailey Humphrey, who's kind of like your midfielder, but can go forward and kick goals. He can mark them. He's sort of that X factor. Some people have called him bloody Dustin Martin, which I think is a bit over the top. And he seems to keep moving up draft boards. People have him going even higher than last week. And I feel like he's going to be number 1 pick in about 2 weeks' time, the way this guy keeps getting projected. But he's someone that has that spark, that sort of that youthful exuberance as well, that sometimes maybe could do it. Another name that gets thrown around is Mateus Filippo, who I'm super high on. Midfielder that, again, can go forward. So potentially those guys, because they can kind of offer a couple of different positions, there's a good chance. And then the other one's probably Oliver Hollands, that he can also sort of, it's a bit more of a winger and playing impact through that. So again, maybe not as hard to break into that position. So for those three, which are the names that keep getting linked to us, I could definitely see them breaking in. I wouldn't say that they're nailed on straight away, but throughout the season, I could definitely see, I guess to steal your one, a world where these guys definitely become best 22 by season end. But I think, like you're probably alluding to, it's not a bad thing if they're not, because I think we all kind of agree that the list should be good enough to make finals, win a final, who knows, maybe even get close to top 4 without bringing out anyone else in at this stage.
Yeah. No, great explanation. And I think that is useful to consider when you think about us, trading futures to bring in picks for this year. That if that is a possibility and it's going to put selection pressure on, then this is the time for us to have the strongest 22 that we can.
And I think if I as far as trading back just slightly onto that, I don't love it, because I think where we're currently positioned in where if I was on tier rankings of the draft class, I think that there's a bit of a drop off just after our pick into the next group. So I think we're just hitting right where we need to be. And so even though I do like a few of the players a little bit lower, if we were getting 2 picks there and then missing out on one of those 3 players that I've just named, I think that would be a bit of a loss. I'd rather at this stage, and I think that fans are feeling like that as well, I want the best players in. This may be, hopefully, our highest draft pick in quite some time, because we're going to be successful and our next pick is going to be 19 or whatever it is. We're not going to be getting these top 10 picks. So I think you nail it while you've got them. And then the only other team was really West Coast having 8, 12, and 20, and then 26, where I could potentially see maybe a 20 coming for us, and we get one of those later kind of picks in between the 20, the 10 and 29, rather than that real maybe high end, or maybe we get that 26. Maybe they don't need all of those picks and they'd rather get something in the futures. It's going to be very interesting to see how that one plays out.
I would like to see another club betting on us having a poor season next year, because we need some more grudges. So I think that'd be some good ammo.
It was fun with that Adelaide Stocker trade, which who knows? I can't remember who they got with their pick. I think it might have been Fisher Mackesy, actually, just quietly. I think no one won that trade in the end. It was a stalemate. Maybe we win because at least Stocker played some football. But let's move on to the next section of this chat, which we've broken down kind of what we've done. But I wanted to have a little bit of a chat and a look at what the rest of the league did, but still obviously talk about us. There was a lot of trades that went through. Lockie, was there anyone that you kind of wish, maybe it was for value, maybe it was just the player that moved, but anyone that went to another club that you were like, I wish we got him across the line instead?
Wow, that's it's a bit of a loaded question, because I think I mean, there was some of the high end names that I guess we kind of floated before. Not that it ever seemed likely. I'll let you kick it off though. Who are the ones for you? Well,
obviously Grundy, when he only goes for pick 27, makes you go, oh, could we have offered anything better there?
So low.
And got him over the line. But obviously it's that salary baggage that we spoke about in that last episode, where giving Harry all that cash, I just don't think there's any way that we could have really afforded him there in the end. But that's definitely the one value-wise I think that probably sticks out. I've got a couple of others, but I'll throw you under the bus. I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I kind of touched on it earlier, and it doesn't need to be a big conversation, because we talked a bit about it off air. Yeah, I just really don't understand the discrepancy between a pick, especially a low pick, like I'm calling anything out of the first round. I feel like I'll say is a low pick, and the player that comes back, like Rory Lobb, for instance, pick 30 and a future second for Rory Lobb, who really he still can improve and be a really, really quality forward, and there's no guarantee of what those 2 picks are getting you.
Yeah,
it just feels like a lot of these guys, I don't know. It feels like we would give more than what some of these other clubs did. And I wonder whether those other offers are actually on the table or whether these things where, well, Rory Lobb wants to go to the Bulldogs, so it's going to happen no matter what they offer.
Yeah, I'd love to know how these deals do float about, whether, clubs really try to get, maybe North really wanted Lobb and they were offering, first round picks, but they were trying their hardest and, Freo are trying their hardest to convince him to go there. But at the end of it, you can't trade a player to somewhere they don't want to go and you're forced to just cop the deal that you get. I know we're having a bit of this discussion before we started to record, and it's definitely something for almost another pod. We could honestly talk about 2 hours about the rules of the AFL and how interesting it is. Yeah. But probably segueing onto that, he wasn't necessarily someone I wanted, but for what he ended up going for, I think it introduced something. Bit of interest was maybe what Lockie Hunter ended up going for. We both, I think I sort of said I didn't really necessarily want him, but for a future third rounder, you're paying a bit of salary, but like we said for a Blake Acres, it's such a risk-free deal. Really, if I was a list manager, anything past a second rounder, I'd have no picks in the next 10 years draft if I could. Yeah. That'd all be going for every single player ever, because if I don't know how long Lockie Hunter has to go on his deal, but if it's 2-ish years or something around that figure, throwing a third rounder and hoping for the best. I know he's potentially got these off-field baggage and things like that, but is the opportunity cost that bad? For a future third, surely that's worth something. It was just an interesting one I saw.
Yeah, that was the next one. And the other one I was just going to throw out there, I'm not sure whether you'd agree or not, but Sam Wiedemann.
Oh, not the one I have. I have another one, so that'll be interesting. But lay Wieders on me.
So the Wiedemann deal was Essendon got Wiedemann, pick 54 and 72 for 37.
Yeah.
Which is, whatever it is, the last second round pick, basically a third round pick. As obviously, I don't see him as being a walk up starter, but as insurance, this is what I'm saying. This is why I'm with you. I wouldn't have anything past bloody pick 20 if I was the list manager. But it's surely that's more value than whatever 18-year-old you're going to bring in with pick 37, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's obviously an interesting one because I think if you look deeper, he probably wouldn't want to be behind more players. No. That's what he was doing there. But that kind of deal for a player that you could maybe say, look at the injury history with Charlie. Harry always misses a couple of games. There's a good chance you can come into this team. And if you can offer more, who knows? But the other one I was going to bring up was not that he fits into us at all and the money again, but the three-way trade that got Tom Mitchell to Collingwood. And you see kind of they gave up Henry 41 and 50 and got Tom Mitchell and 25. And you're like, sorry, what? And I get there's all this talk about him regressing and maybe that kind of midfielder not being what a lot of teams want. And I don't think he'd really fit into us regardless of what his salary is. But when you hear just the value of what's got traded, you think, could we have got on that and just added an extra guy to our team? Is there anyone else out there in the AFL that is maybe unwanted that you could bring in for some ridiculous value like that in my eyes?
Sauce, if you're listening, hit us up. We'd love to chat to you about these nuances of trading.
Get him on the pod. Maybe he'll give us a bit more insight than we've seen on Trade Radio. That's the call out, Sauce. Get on here. It's we'll if we have to promote, Continental Tires, we'll do it. I'll do whatever's possible
whatever it takes
to get him over the line. But let us know if there's any other players that moved throughout the period that you would have loved to see us have a go at, because it's always interesting in hindsight to see what actually the player went for and think, we could have probably done that deal. But there's more players that could potentially come in, not in the trade period, not in the draft, but through the delisted sort of free agents or just delisted players in general. And there's been a bunch, and there's a few I actually want to talk about and get your thoughts on them. We touched on a few of these, so I'll see if anything's changed as well. But is there any player straight away that you have seen that's been delisted recently and you think, get him to the baggers?
Well, you might be excited to hear that my opinion has changed on some of this
Ooh.
stuff. And shout out to Harry, another plug for one of the greatest podcasts, Still and Friends. Just thinking about that kind of what he was talking about with the culture and the leaders and the impact that those more senior players have has kind of shifted my thinking on some of them, where a few weeks ago I was feeling like, what's the harm in bringing someone like Robbo back as someone who is in a seemingly high quality environment at Brisbane where they've had some success over the past few years? Is bringing that in just going to be like a little bit of that icing on the cake? And now I'm feeling more like things are working right now. Let's not mess with it. And that's what only bringing in Akers has kind of said to me, that we don't want to mess with what we have right now. It's going well. We're improving. So I'm not looking to stir the pot too much.
That is fair enough. You put the line through Mitch Robinson, which I'm glad you've joined my sort of take on things. It's nice to see that I've been able to convince you. But I'll throw some names at you, and we don't have to go too in depth in each one. But I'd love to get your thoughts, because there's a few players that I guess either Carlton supporters have been speaking about, whether it's now or previously. And one of those is James Rowe from Adelaide. I know a few people were definitely quite high on taking him over Durden at the time. I remember saying, and I'll of course make myself sound like an absolute wanker here and say that I was very much team Durds over him, thought he offered a lot more. And guess what? You've been delisted, Rowe. So I was correct. Make me list manager. It's 23, 36 games in total, played 17 this year, as a more goal-kicking forward than a pressure forward, which we've maybe earmarked a little bit. Would you take a flyer on James Rowe?
Can't say I'm that interested in Jimmy. I definitely have him below our current hierarchy. And if you're getting delisted from Adelaide, I think it says something.
Agree. It's a no from me. We move on to one of the more recent ones, and it's from Collingwood, but I'd love to get your thoughts. It is Caleb Poulter. He's 20 years old. He's only played the 12 games, only one this year, played 11 in his year before.
God.
So he sort of really dropped off. I thought there was a bit of talent with this guy. Can kind of play a bit of wing, bit of outside, showed a bit of something. There's one of the worst Twitter accounts that has ever existed that really held him in great esteem. And as bad as it is for Caleb, and I feel bad for him, there was a lot of joy coming out of me today, hearing that he'd been delisted, knowing that man's probably crying into a pillow somewhere today. But what are your thoughts on Caleb to the baggers?
Maybe we do it just for that gag and just to be able to have that in the Twitter community. That could be something. That is really surprising to me that it's 12 games and one this season, because I feel like I've watched him play more than 12 games. And he's done some bloody funny things in those games, I'll tell you that. But he's also shown a little bit. So as a 20-year-old guy, I would be open to that.
Seeing that it may be a bit of a position that we're looking at still, it interests me. But I feel like it's weird. Whenever a player gets delisted, you immediately just think, well, what's wrong with him? Particularly because,
totally
plays those games, new coach comes in and says, you're not good enough. And you see Collingwood's rise. Is that them realizing that he isn't good enough? Or is it just sometimes you find yourself out of favor in a new game plan? Probably will say no still on Poulter. I'd rather us go to the draft and find someone of his ilk. But I'm intrigued to see if he does go somewhere, because I actually did weirdly rate him a bit highly in his first season. Next one is someone we spoke about on last pod. You were pretty high on him. It's 24-year-old Quinton Narkle, playing 41 games, only 8 throughout this season. Hasn't seemed to have really got a hell of a lot of interest. Has that changed your thoughts?
I'll quickly caveat all these by saying I don't think any player that we name right now is best 22. It's all depth here. So I'm not saying that Caleb's going to be pushing Cotters off the wing or anything like that. But having said that, Narkle is still the one for me on this list that I would be most interested in. You're right that I haven't really heard that many whispers, but I don't know. As someone to take a flyer on, I just feel like there's just something there.
Yeah, I weirdly, even though there hasn't been interest, and so that's kind of maybe made me a bit more negative on this, thinking that there maybe was no interest, starts to almost make me contemplate, well, could you throw him a 1-year rookie deal
Yeah.
and say, here's the bottom basement price, 1 year to prove it, have a go? Like, what are you losing there if we were either going to get a guy in the rookie draft and a 18-year-old that maybe wasn't good enough that every team missed out on him and chose not to select him about 10 different times,
Yeah.
or a guy that showed something for one season? I don't hate the idea now, weirdly, on one of these guys. He's probably the top of the list as well. Not going to be annoyed if we don't get him, but if you could do that sort of 1-year rookie deal, I don't think that there's much loss that could come from that.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, again, I don't know if you want to get into this at all today or whether we do it more in the draft, but it's the opportunity cost of, well, are we taking someone like him or what we get for pick 49?
Yeah.
Or is it someone like him or pick 29? Like that they're the kind of trade-offs. If it's just going to be some late 3rd, 4th round pick or someone like him who we know has shown something and is heading into the right age bracket, then I'd be much more into it.
Very fair. Next one was a bit of a shock. Maybe a shock delisting. It feels like it would have been shock a couple of years ago. Not a shock now. Jed Anderson, who from North Melbourne, is 28 years old. Unfortunately, this is stiff. Left on 99 games. Played the 14 this year. Would you like to see him play his 100th game in Navy?
Firstly, you've stitched me up. I thought you were going to hit me with a different name there. So, let the record show that Jed Anderson is not our man currently. Yeah, I don't know. He's weird. I'm going to sit on the fence with that one. I mean, he's in the age bracket that I guess that we're interested in, and he's got the experience, so he could be that depth. I don't know. What would you say to him?
A couple of years ago, probably, I would have said yes.
Yeah.
Not sure. He's been great this season. Struggling North. When North delist a player, it doesn't get you too excited about it at all. I'm happy to pass on that one. And I think the player that was your man, I've actually taken off this list. So I actually looking at it, didn't think it was even worth a discussion, but you've made me bring up his name, and it's a no for me for Jared Brander. Is it a no for you as well? It was just sort of the key position facet of it.
He was one of those guys. Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just sort of like knowing that we didn't really bring in any tallish kind of depth, whether he was someone that you'd go, is it worth something? But
yeah,
I'm not a fan.
No, not a fan. But it's just funny because a year ago it was like he was one of those names where it's like, oh, maybe he could be someone that could be unlocked. But gee whiz, if you're getting delisted already, it's a no from me. There's something there.
Fair. Now we move on to there's 3 Richmond players that have been delisted that love to get your thoughts on. First one is Jake Arts. He has played 42 games, 7 this season. I was shocked when I found out his age. You want to take a guess on how old you think Jake Arts is?
Wow, that's a really tough question. I know. I'm gonna.
If I hadn't have said anything about age, because now you're thinking, well, what is he? Is he 17 years old? Is he 42? If I'd have just said, how old's Jake Arts, what would you have said?
Yeah, I probably would have said 24.
I would have said the same thing. He's 27, which I was like, and that made me a lot less interested at all. I wasn't super keen to start with, but I know he's a guy that, for those a betting few out there, I always years ago would always have him for 1. I feel like he'd always consistently kick a goal a game, and I liked that about him. He was a bit more of a marking forward, which is something that we have spoken about. But seeing that age just really turned me off. What would you make of a player like him?
But it's even turned you off that kind of that 1-year flyer situation. No, that's the hard thing. It's hard to know what these kind of players would actually be wanting as a blooming delisted player. Like, surely we're not paying through the roof to get them in, but it doesn't excite me.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all.
Not that
Let's
any
move
of
on to
these
the
guys
next
do.
one, because there's a guy that we spoke about previously as maybe a trade target. Potentially, it was Riley Collier-Dawkins, who was 22 years old, 11 games in total, only the 2 this season. We spoke a little bit about him, maybe trading for him. Now that you get him for free, does that tempt you at all?
I mean, another guy. I think we spoke about a bit in the last episode. When you're that young,
Yeah.
I'm open to us taking the flyers in that situation, but like I don't see a world, as we love to say on this show, where he's like pushing into the team.
Yeah, and on that, I kind of think that if Richmond have there was all these big talks about this kid being a future star. If he has only played 11 games and then they have gone out of their way to try and recruit 2 star midfielders now, they don't want him at all. I just don't think that there's something there. Maybe weirdly like a Liam Stocker, not to throw him under the bus or anything.
Just gonna say,
but that kind of ilk where we were all pretty high on him, but for whatever reason the club said no, he's nowhere near it. So what kind of player are you actually bringing in for that? I'm happy to pass. The next guy is probably one of the few I'd maybe looking at a little bit. I know Carlton supporters have been pretty 50-50 on him, but it's Sydney Stack, 22 years old, played 35 games, only 2 this season. Does he excite you a little bit more than some of the other names?
He'd probably be my second most exciting to Quinton, just because they're like I guess a few of these players have done this, but they're the 2 there that have, I guess, shown the most.
Yes, I agree.
The kind of potential, and when you've shown something and maybe it hasn't been consistent, that's when a team can be like, well, we can bring that consistency to you. So it's interesting. I don't know whether I would. Yeah, I mean, do you think he's a better player than Owies?
I don't. It's a tough one. That's a tough one, actually.
Because if you do, then that's probably it. Then it would be a yes to bringing him in. I would have thought. He's
definitely, I feel like, got that goal out of nothing more than an Owies does. I think Owies is a bit more straightforward in kind of know what you're getting. He's going to bring that pressure and he might get a mark and he might kick 1, maybe 2 at best a week. Sydney Stack, I feel like, has that potential to either kick 3 and do something magical, or you just won't see him a little bit more hit and miss than that. I know he's played a little bit down in defense as well last couple of seasons and shown a little bit at times. The interesting thing is, like, he's definitely one of those players like maybe your Knuckle where he's got that higher ceiling and you're hoping, can we be that team that takes this guy that for whatever reason was struggling and unlock that potential? There's also those sort of culture question marks. Obviously has that sort of COVID indiscretion and little things. Talking about culture, you mentioned it when we kind of spoke about bringing in players, saying that you are happy with our culture now. You didn't necessarily think we needed any more big leaders or different things. There's sort of 2 ways you can go in this. You can say our culture's good, like maybe like a Geelong and a Stengel. You bring in the 100%. Bad boy, turn him into a superstar, or player comes in and it doesn't go well. Where do you sit with? If you saw Sydney Stack as the talent was there, but you were worried about baggage, what would your decision be with our current culture?
It's a great rebuttal, and the perfect rebuttal to what I was saying earlier about culture. So well played. And obviously there is precedent for it working, and I like it. But I think for where we're at, I'm very much on the end of the scale that says let's not mess with it right now. I'm so comfortable with like the trajectory of our development that I don't think we need to be trying those things right now. Not that I'm ever closed off to it, but it wouldn't be my preference.
Yeah, I think that I'd be happy with us taking a gamble on a player like this. I doubt that because of the strong bond, and obviously I don't know anything, so this is pure speculation by me, but I would feel that it wouldn't stifle too much. I think for me, looking at this, it's more, I don't see the talent there as worth the risk. Obviously, Stengel's that one that you look back in hindsight and think, oh, of course, Yeah, bring him in. Bring him in. He'd be a superstar. His talent was definitely always higher than a Stack. I think his ceiling was always going to be higher.
Right.
So for that now, I'd take a bit more of a risk on that kind of player and hope it works. I'm just not super convinced with the Sydney Stack. And I think position-wise as well, if he is playing as a bit of a rebound kind of defender, well, we don't need that. Small forward. I know we still think we need some goals, but does he get in over Durden and Motlop, and then you raise the Owies option too? I just don't think that he's the perfect need.
Yep. Absolutely spot on, mate.
And then the last player we'll talk about is Mitch Wallace, who's 29 years old, maybe a bit more of that experience that we're mentioning. 162 games, only 5 last year. Been moved more into this small forward, pressure forward role, taking some marks, kicking some goals, rather than his midfield. He's someone you'd take a look at on that experienced end.
Not for me. I'm sorry to say. I'm sorry to end it on a no. It would have been nice to wrap it up with a yes, but do you think differently?
He's closer to my number one than maybe he should be. And maybe I'm just buying in too much to what I think he could bring, maybe adding a bit more of that experience culture. But I don't know if he's that kind of player. If they think he is someone that can help drive some standards, now that he's been delisted, like I thought, could he be a bit of a trade option as someone that could help nurture, be that budget Luke Bruce that we're kind of looking for, whether he plays or not, can help galvanize that playing group. If he's that kind of leader, I would have no issues bringing him in for one season. I'd love us almost kind of maybe what we're doing with an Ed Kerno and I don't know if he'd take this, but now he's been delisted, maybe he would. Pretty much saying, you're a twos player. Like you are VFL, but you're here for all these other reasons, and you're there either in the forward line or in the midfield in spurts in the twos to help a Jack Carroll, to help these other guys around him develop. Because if you're looking at our VFL team, if you're looking at our experience, that's there to maybe shelter some of these guys in the VFL a little bit. So, you know, say we bring in a draftee, he's not getting that tag in the VFL game. He's able to not be like a Paddy Dow in the AFL where it's just like you're thrown in. They can develop a little bit better. They're not that focal point. I don't hate it for that instance. But again, it probably depends what you're paying in, what contracts and things are like, and the opportunity of what you could bring in instead. But I think for leadership wise, I don't hate the option.
Yeah. No, I think that's all pretty fair. It's just speculation about what, like, is he actually a leader? Is he actually the type of leader you want? Because if we were taking a risk on that, then how would he be different really to like Mitch Robinson?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's the other side of it. And that's just purely, you'd have to find out what kind of player he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'd be so far down the pecking order of midfield and forward line as well that he might just be like, well, what's even the point of coming across? I was doing this at the Doggies, but maybe he wants a lifeline. I don't know, but let us know what you think of those players. There is anyone else who's been delisted that you like the look of for whatever position? I'd love to have a bit of a discussion with you guys because it's always fun. The hypotheticals of will this player be good for us coming in? And with that, we'll kind of end on trying to build up for our next episode, which will be a AFL draft sort of build up to see how we're going, what players we're looking for, who we're going to bring in, going in depth in looking at all the talent. It's not just going to be first round. It's going to be looking at some other later picks as well. I'm very excited, as I've said on multiple episodes, to delve into the draft class, but we need to find out what positions we still need to fill. So, Lockie, we've done the trade period. Where do we still need to look at if you're trying to find the holes in this squad?
Oh, boy. Still no ruckman. Still no break in case of emergency ruckman.
That's a worry.
Would be one. I mean, that's one, obviously. We feel like we're going to be taking a midfielder, and I love that. And then some kind of key position, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I think you've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it. Ruck is still that issue. I think I've said it previously. I just don't think the draft is the right place for that. I don't know whether we'll end up maybe going to the rookie draft and getting a bit more of a state experienced player or just someone to add to it. I remember bringing up like your Radaglia of a guy that could play a bit of ruck, go forward, be that Levi Casbolt-esque player. I think that's still the mold that would suit us, just as someone in that age bracket. I don't know who it is, and that's been the hardest thing for us. I feel like a broken record with it, but I've tried to look through every list. I've tried to go through the state competitions, and there's just no one that I can really find that like fills any of those ruck holes, really. But the only other player that I think we haven't spoken about, and it's kind of like pointless somewhat even bringing him up now because like the trade period's done. I'm trying to think of his name because I can't even remember it, which is maybe tells me let's not bring him in. But it's like Darcy Fort from like a Brisbane who doesn't really get a game there, is an okay, serviceable, experienced break in case of emergency. Probably wouldn't want to come across because he's too far down the depth over here compared to there. But like, there's just no one out there. If you're saying he's one of the better options, like, my God, what have we got? So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Key position depth. I'd love us to. And I've got a bunch of players lined up to speak about, which is I don't want to go too early and talk about these. No. Like there could be an option with our first pick, and or if we trade up, there's a couple of players around there that maybe fill some of these holes. And I think there's a couple late that you could take a flyer with as a bit of key position depth, whether it's up forward or down back.
Yep.
And then I kind of think that it's probably still just keep bringing in midfielders. You can never have too many. We've spoken about depth being a bit of an issue without a center field. You never know how players are going to develop. You never know what injuries you're going to get. I think you always need to keep bringing in the best. That's probably where we're going to go. And I'm excited. What do you guys think are the positions? And can anyone give me a ruckman that...
Oh, please.
It's out there. Has anyone watched any state leagues or anywhere that they think, mate, this guy could be the answer as a depth option? Because I've tried and I've struggled to find anyone. But yeah, I think those are really it. Would it? I know I asked you this last week. I'll keep referring to it. If rated out of 10, actually, how worried would you be if we did not bring in anyone that could potentially help our ruck situation?
How worried would I be out of 10? Maybe lower than you'd think. I'll say 6.
I probably would have said 7, but maybe that's pushing it. Maybe that's just me worrying about our injuries. Like we've got Pitt, we've got De Koning. Who knows? The hypothetical says and the positive says that Murkov steps up and becomes the superstar. But you never know. It's an issue. It doesn't look like we're going to address it. JSOS to the rescue once again.
That's it.
No, it's going to be an interesting year. But yes, as I said, we will be back with a couple more episodes before this year is done. We'll do the big draft build-up, which is going to be an action-packed episode. You don't want to miss it.
Yeah.
And then after the draft, we will recap the list as a whole, go through who we picked, chat about them, and build up for a big 2023. If you've liked what you've heard, subscribe on YouTube if you're there. Follow if you're on any streaming service. Get over to our socials at Navy Blue Corner because it helps us. And then you never miss anything. You're going to be involved for the fan questions. You're going to be involved in this podcast. And that's what we love to see. But thanks again for listening. See you guys next time.